In this lesson, we're going to take a look at various daily use cases of Dynamo for Revit. So by the end of this lesson, you're going to have an understanding of how to identify those daily use cases for Dynamo within Revit. As a Dynamo user at your firm, you're going to hear the question a lot of the time, can Dynamo do blank? And it'd be really nice if you could start to explore options for using Dynamo. Using Dynamo, you can automate all sorts of different tasks, a lot of that stuff that's kind of boring in Revit. That's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. In addition to identifying those use cases, you are going to learn how to work with Excel data in this lesson. Excel is extremely popular in the architectural world when it comes to inputting data into a database-like fashion. Importing that data into Revit through Dynamo is very possible, as well as exporting it. So we're going to take a look at one half of that equation in this lesson. With that in mind, we're going to jump right into Revit and start reading some Excel documents. Alright, so once again we have the Revit sample model open. Unfortunately, this has a few sheets in it. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just remove these sheets from the model. We'll jump into a level 1 floor plan and we'll be good to go. We'll go ahead and fire up Dynamo from the Manage tab once again. Included in the dataset for this lesson is an Excel file. This Excel file has some pretty standard architectural sheet numbers and names, nothing too fancy, and they might differ from what you use internally at your company, but it's a good starting point for this lesson. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and start once again with the Dynamo template file that we have in our samples folder. Once again, if it's not in your samples folder, you can find it in the dataset, just like in all of the other lessons. I'll go ahead and expand my library, and we'll go ahead and do a save as on this file. And in this case, I'm going to name this 6.1-working. You can name this whatever you would like. And there we go. So our Excel file is included in the dataset. It's just called architecturalsheets.xlsx. That's the extension. And in my case specifically, I don't even have Excel installed for this example. That's important. Excel nodes in Dynamo require you to have Excel installed. Although in newer versions of Dynamo, we have access to another toolkit called OpenXML that we'll use in this example. They're a little more stable and they work really nicely in newer versions. If you have Excel installed, you can use the Excel variant as well. So if we want to import data into Revit through Dynamo, our category that we're going to navigate to is our import-export category. We have a data category in here with a whole lot of actions as well. We have CSV interactions. CSV is comma-separated values. That's a text file. We have Excel options, the XML options, and JSON. JSON's another popular file format, and it's actually what Dynamo graphs are under the hood. They're JSON. It's another one that you'll start to hear more about as you get into this Dynamo world. In this case, we want to import Excel. So we'll place that node. We'll see that it's asking for a file path, that's the red input port, and the sheet name, which is also a red input port. The blue input ports already have values assigned to them, so they're running by default. So we'll need to fulfill a few of these inputs. In this case, we are on run manual at this point. Let's go ahead and toggle this to run automatic. That way we can see the changes happen live. And for our input type of file path, this is a input type we haven't interacted with yet in this series. So if we navigate to input, basic, it's not in there. So what we need to do is we need to navigate to a few other categories that we haven't explored quite yet. So let's go ahead and search for file path. As you can see, file path inputs are available under the File System category in the library. Clicking on File System navigates us to that location, and coincidentally, it's under the Import-Export category that we were in earlier. It's a good way to kind of navigate through things and figure out where they come from. In this case, we have a file path node, and the description says it allows you to select a file on the system to get its file path. Let's place that node now. By default, no file is selected, and we have a browse button that we can click. Let's go ahead and click it now. In this case, we're picking the architectural sheets file. and we'll make that connection. And the sheet name, I'll have to give you this value. One thing to keep in mind is the sheet name, you need to know that value. So in the case of this sample file, my sheet name is sheets. We have headers of sheet number and sheet name and all of the values available to us. So we got to keep that in mind, that we want to know those values to be able to use them. So right back in Dynamo, we'll go ahead and double click for a code block. We're not going to use it for code. We're going to use it for a string entry. So that's a review from previous lessons. Adding quotes around a word converts it to a string. We'll go ahead and make that connection now as well. Since we are in Run Automatic, we are seeing the changes happen live. And we are now reading these values with this Open XML Import Excel node. Now's a good time to go ahead and group these nodes. So we'll hit Control G on our keyboard. These are an input operation, so we'll make it purple. And we'll say input, select sheet to read. We'll say select Excel file to read. And we'll hit save. At this point, the data is organized in rows, so it's navigating from left to right and working down our Excel file. If we want to modify this data, we're able to do that as well. So the easiest way to do this is to actually modify the data to invert it into another way. And we could search for this node. It's a little bit easier that way. So we'll go ahead and search for transpose, and we'll see that it's an organization operation on a list. So by default, the Excel nodes read it on a row by row basis. We want to separate these things into columns. So we could do that with a transpose node. So we'll place this node now, and we'll verify how that looks. So now we can see that we have two sublists. One is our sheet numbers, and the other is our sheet names. Pretty cool. At this point, we are getting those headers, so it is kind of a little frustrating to have those. We want to remove those because we actually don't need them at this time. And the easiest way to do this while maintaining access to them is to deconstruct the list. It's kind of a big topic. I'm going to skim over it a bit. It's in the list modification category, but what it does is it takes the first item for a list, it outputs it in one output port, and it takes the remainder and outputs those in another. Works really well for working with Excel files. So we'll place that now, and we'll see that we have two outputs. One contains our sheet number and sheet name, which are also our parameter names, and the rest includes our sheet numbers and our sheet names. Go ahead and hit save, and now we're starting to really get this to work in that practical way. One thing to keep in mind is Dynamo is not rerunning the Excel import operation every time we place a node. That's because it's already ran, so it's just going to kind of navigate and keep that data cached. It would rerun if we picked a new sheet. Alright, so for creating Revit elements, we've updated Revit elements previously and got their data. To create them, we can do that as well. If we navigate to the Revit category, we can navigate to the Views subcategory because we want to create sheets, and sheets are views in Revit. We can also navigate to the Sheet category within the views, and we have a whole lot of different options in here. The green portion is our creation portion. So we're able to create a sheet by a name, number, and title block. Pretty cool. You can also do it by title block and views if you want to preload views onto your sheet. In this example, we're not going to do that portion. I encourage you to expand upon this example and actually place views at the same time and see how that all works out as well. It's a really great use case for this workflow. In our case, we're going to use the by name, number, and title block node. And at this point, we have a sheet name input, a sheet number input, and our title block family type. Just to see what kind of title blocks we have access to, we can go ahead and navigate in Revit to our family category in the project browser and our annotation symbols category. We will see that we have a few options in here. We have this A0 and A1. We're going to use those ones for this. So let's go ahead and expand Dynamo. We'll navigate back to the Revit category. If we want to select something to work with in Revit, we have to navigate to Selection. And in our case, we should have a Family Types dropdown available to us. So we'll place that now. We've used this node previously in a previous lesson, and it has access to every single title block inside of our template file or our current Revit project. So we're just going to go ahead and pick the A1 metric. I'll plug that into the title block family type. We're going to go ahead and switch our run mode to manual at this time because we're getting ready to create Revit elements, and I don't want to keep doing that. So we'll change that now. We'll hit save. And we have two sublists at this time. We need to separate these out in order to use them with this node. So how do we do that? Previously, we've used a node called getItemAtIndex. That's available under the list category in the library. If we navigate to list, inspect, we have getItemAtIndex. We've used this node and it works really well. In this lesson, we're going to expand upon this and use a code block for this now. We've used getItemAtIndex, it's a great node, but we're going to expand upon that a little bit here. We double click for a code block and we type in data, and we put a square bracket, and I'll zoom in so we could see this a little better. So let me start that over. Double click, type data, bracket. We know that our sheet numbers are index 0 of our list. So if we were to type in 0, bracket, we now have an input on this code block. Previously, we've used code blocks for string entry, number entry, and so on. We haven't used them to actually make formulas and do this kind of thing. So our data that we want to input would be our transpose data, and you'll now see that the code block's fulfilled. We do need to press run because we're on manual run mode. So if we do that, we will see our sheet numbers being output. This is a getItemAtIndex shortcut right within a code block. This is a really great way to do this, and you'll probably find that you do it this way more often than not. If you want to get more items from that data, you can click after the semicolon. I'll paste the first line, and now we have two rows doing the same thing. At this point, my node sheet by name, number, and title block, the sheet name is the first input, and the sheet number is the second input. So let's go ahead and make the first line index 1 and the second line index 0 and hit run. You will see that it doesn't look like a whole lot changed, and that's because we are still outputting the sheet numbers as this bottom line. When it comes to code blocks in Dynamo, it only outputs the very last line. If we change this to a 1, you will see sheet names. So always keep that in mind if you start to get a little bit confused with that. You can always add watch nodes to these output ports to be able to figure out what's going on. So keep that in mind. That complete, we can go ahead and group some nodes. So we'll group the deconstruct, the transpose, and the code block. We'll make it a light green. We'll say transpose and get numbers. Transpose and retrieve, we'll say. For the description, we'll say get sheet numbers and names. And we'll hit save. We'll make these connections in order. And now if we tile Dynamo over Revit, I'll collapse my library, and we hit run, we should see sheets start to come back to our model. So we will see a plus sign appeared in our project browser. Expanding that, we will see all the sheet types available to us. If we navigate to each sheet, we will see that we have a title block, and each sheet with each sheet number is already assigned. These are real Revit elements that we're creating right in Dynamo, so if you had special sorting parameters for your project browser, you can also set those in this portion of the graph right here. So you can come out from the sheet by name, number, and title block and actually connect and start updating parameters as well, which is pretty neat. So there we have it. We do have that one creating these sheets for us. If we were to run it again, it's not going to try to create the sheets again at this point. So pressing run won't do anything because none of the data has changed at this point. Dynamo has this concept of element binding to where it starts to relate elements that you've created previously to the elements that exist. So as long as you're not making too many changes, it's pretty smart in that way. Running on manual run mode is still pretty safe though, so it's kind of generally a good rule to keep if you're creating Revit elements. There we have it. With that in mind, you now know how to read an Excel file, create sheets from that Excel file to be able to create those in your project. I encourage you to expand upon this example, maybe place views on those sheets, update some of the additional parameters, or add some drop downs in there to be able to select different sheet classes. You can have one sheet in your Excel file for level 1 related sheets and level 2 related sheets and so on. You could really build upon this in a great way. In our next example, we're actually going to make this compatible for Dynamo Player. That way we could see how that works as well. We've created a few graphs now that are reusable in really great ways, and Dynamo Player is an additional extension available to us to be able to automate these things and reuse them across projects really well. So with that in mind, you know how to create sheets from Excel. I hope that helps out, and I look forward to seeing you in the rest of the lessons.